The normalization of older men with younger women has long been perpetuated and upheld by the mainstream movie industry. What makes an education unique is how it uses this perceived normalcy to reveal its underlying deviancy. An education follows Jenny, a teenager whose life changes when she meets David, a man twice her age. Set in 1961, Jenny's life takes a cruel turn when a mysterious and charming stranger offers her a ride home. The film is a very dark coming-of-age story about a young woman forced into womanhood by a cunning and deceitful older man. An education cloaks the horror of Jenny's experience in the allure of a romantic drama, revealing its darkness through charm and seduction. Peter Sarsgaard gives a phenomenal performance as David, a manipulative predator who targets young girls for his own gratification. He presents himself as a very posh and sophisticated, worldly man. Everything about him, including his accent, is crafted to deceive others into believing that he is more respectable than he really is. The movie is set in a time where relationships between older men and young girls were not as scrutinized as they are today. Feminism had little presence, especially in private educational institutions that groomed young girls for marriage. Jenny is introduced to us as an idealistic young girl with dreams of excitement and adventure. Her dreams are shattered by David, a scammer who draws her into his seductive fantasy. And this fantasy involves him taking on the burden of responsibility in exchange for her blind loyalty and willful blindness. The world he offers her is far more exciting than the one she knows, and more so the one that she is not looking forward to, a life filled with hard work, and more importantly, a complete lack of excitement. Prior to meeting David, Jenny is at a very pivotal time in her life. She is on track to studying English at Oxford, fulfilling her parents' greatest hopes and aspirations. Jenny's perception of her reality is extremely naive. Before she met David, she never truly questioned why she wanted to go to university, or more so, why her parents were desperate for her to go to university. From what little we see, Jenny is a well-liked and hardworking student. Despite her vulnerabilities, she appears to have a very good head on her shoulders, and this makes her situation feel incredibly relatable. So much of Jenny's story is about confronting the expectations placed on women and girls, and coming to the realization of just how low that glass ceiling really is. While watching the film, I couldn't help but ask, are girls not allowed to make mistakes? The punishment Jenny faces for being with David nearly derails her life even before it begins. Jenny is an only child living in a time where options were very limited for women. Men were expected to take care of themselves and others, whereas women were expected to be taken care of. And even worse, a woman's youth was seen as her most valuable asset. Much of her parents' frustration stems from the belief that their daughter has an expiration date. They see Oxford as a pathway of meeting the right type of man who will not only offer her financial security, but social stability as well. When David enters Jenny's world, it triggers a complete unraveling. Everything she believed about her life, and most importantly, everything she thought others believed was possible for her, was shattered. What's shocking about David is the way the adults around her completely accept him as normal. They never question his behavior, or if they are suspicious, they never question him to his face. David presents himself as an older man who's extremely reliable, well-mannered, and well-off, which shields him from suspicion. What makes him attractive to Jenny is totally different than what makes him attractive to her parents. Jenny's parents view David as a man that can provide for their daughter. They're not really concerned how he's providing for her. They just care that he appears to be able to do so. Throughout the film, they criticize her age-appropriate boyfriends for not being enough, even though these young men seem very good intention, kind, respectable people. And in so many ways, David was a knight in shining armor for her parents. They saw him as someone that could take care of their daughter and potentially save them hundreds and thousands of dollars. Their blind approval of David, driven by social aspirations rather than genuine concern for her, really undermines their moral authority in Jenny's eyes by the end of the film. And Jenny's misplaced trust in David really exposed the hollowness of their guidance. Now, whereas her parents see David as a means to an end, Jenny likes him for totally different reasons. On one hand, yes, she does admire his higher social status, but on the other hand, she sees him as a gateway into a different kind of life, one not rooted in routine and instead unpredictability. Up until she met David, Jenny has had a very rigid life. Everything in her life has been planned out for her. And so the idea of going with the flow and having someone take care of the details is extremely appealing at this age. Jenny's whole life revolves around art and beauty, something that David very much brings to life. What David does is he makes a lot of her dreams extremely tangible and within arm's reach. However, everything he's offering her is surface level escapism. In exchange for these sensory pleasures, she's expected to turn a blind eye to the ugly things he has to do to provide them. Jenny's idea of the world is quite sheltered and in many ways less open-minded and far more superficial than she believed. She totally buys into David's world, and even after he reveals himself, she romanticizes the situation, viewing David as adventurous and brave rather than criminal and deceitful. And she allows his aesthetic appeal to totally override his lack of substance. And Jenny is such a great example of how adults often manipulate youth. When you're young, you may be able to recognize red flags, but you might not be able to appreciate their danger. There's a scene before they're intimate where David encourages her to role play with him. And it's in that moment you realize what a dangerous predator this man is. David does not see Jenny as a love interest. He sees her as a blank slate he can project all his fantasies onto until the next young girl comes along. I think Carey Mulligan's performance is absolutely iconic because you can see her compartmentalizing all his actions. What makes David such a cunning predator is his ability to live a double life and encourage his victims to do so as well. He makes her an accomplice. He constantly lies to the people around her, putting pressure on her to cover for him. And a skilled predator knows how to avoid questions because they allow their victims to kind of fill in the blanks. And over time, she's hesitant to really push David on what he does, not because she doesn't want to seem grown up or less intelligent, but because deep down she already knows the answer. One of the standouts in this film is the contrast between Jenny and Helen, played by Rosamund Pike. And Rosamund Pike also gives a very standout performance. Helen might not be book smart, but she's clearly street smart. She's aware of what her boyfriend and what David do for a living. However, she turns a blind eye in order to reap the benefits. Helen finds comfort in the things that have long left women miserable and disconnected from themselves. Her boyfriend is not drawn to her because she fails to understand him. She's drawn to her because she ignores what he is. Throughout the film, Helen constantly questions the practicality of what Jenny is doing. How does going to Oxford guarantee a comfortable and luxurious lifestyle? And I think Helen's appearance very much dupes Jenny, especially as a young girl, into thinking that that's what sophistication looks like. And I think the way David courts Jenny through material items, experiences, all these restaurants is meant to undermine the true cost of what he's taking from her. One of the film's most striking scenes is when he takes her to Paris. And I think what makes the scene so haunting is because it feels so romantic. For someone like Jenny at this time, traveling to a place like Paris alone was simply unacceptable. You would need a man to either guide you there or take you there. By the end of what seems like a dream trip, Jenny loses her virginity, a moment she later looks back on as almost underwhelming and completely hollow. And David robs her of all these meaningful milestones she was supposed to have with other people. And what that does is it sets the bar so low that she feels almost ashamed for having expected anything more. Much of the film explores how society has really scared women away from solitude. Both her parents and David either offer to take care of her or find someone who will. And Jenny's time with David really challenges her self-perception, forcing her to confront whether or not the person she believed to be is really the person she is in practice. One of the standout scenes is when Jenny's school finds out she's engaged and she has this discussion with the headmaster. And in this conversation, she discusses her very limited options. She reduces her life to two choices. The first, to live a boring and difficult life, and the second, to live one filled with fun. And this fun she speaks of is living a life where she can offload responsibility onto a man who can take care of her. And this, of course, completely horrifies her headmaster, who sounds more like a concerned parent than an authority figure. And I thought this was such an interesting contrast to someone like her mother. Jenny's parents, to me, was one of the most perplexing aspects of this film. Jenny's mother in particular is very interesting, not because of what she says, but because of what she doesn't say. Even though she doesn't speak a lot, her body language, her eye contact, you get the sense that she's not that comfortable with David, like she knows that something is off about him. However, she doesn't want to disappoint her husband. It's very clear that Jenny's mother wants her to go to university. And we don't really find out that much about her parents, but I think they come from a very working class background, and they've spent their life giving Jenny these options that they wish they had when they were younger. And despite their financial struggles, they really hope that Jenny would rise above them, either through marriage or through this university degree. And Jenny's mother, even though you get the sense that she is worried about her daughter, never actively steps in to try and stop the relationship, and instead trusts her daughter's judgment. It never really dawns on her parents just how limited the options they presented to Jenny really are. And it's not until David enters her life that Jenny realized that she had never truly made a choice of her own in her entire life. She simply followed the path she was conditioned to take, if not explicitly, then subconsciously. Her parents never said, marry David, but they also never restricted her time with him. And I think what's so scary about Jenny is because her parents raised her she's incredibly intelligent. She has such refined taste. Worse is that she truly appreciates the value of things others overlook. Yet when it comes to David, those same instincts do not kick in, or if they do, she actively fights against them. For better or worse, David forces Jenny to unlearn and question everything she's been taught to see as normal, and more importantly, sophisticated. Her whole life, she has followed the plans laid out to her by her teachers and parents, but she never really questioned the wisdom of these plans. Through David, she comes to realize that anyone, including herself, is capable of living a lie, and that true character isn't in what you say, but what you do. There are so many moments in this film where Jenny wanted to say no, or she hoped the adults in her life would step in and say no for her, and because they didn't, it kept her trapped in this destructive relationship a lot longer than she should have been. The dynamic between Jenny and David reflect damaging societal norms that keep women and girls trapped. The education they receive often enable men like David to thrive and get away with their predation. And at the end, even though Jenny was able to move on, she was very much harmed by her education. An education that taught her to doubt her instincts and give David a second chance. An education that taught her to put men like David on a pedestal, romanticizing his criminality as innocent fun. An education that pressured her to excuse the predatory actions of a grown man by pretending to be a grown woman. And worse, an education that taught her to measure the value of a person based on what they can regurgitate rather than who they are as people. Overall, I highly recommend this film. It's an instant classic. Every time I come back to it, I notice something different. Peter Sarsgaard's performance is phenomenal because there's nothing overtly strange about him. I mean, your parents tell you your whole life, do not follow strangers, but Peter Sarsgaard is not the type of stranger society would have warned you about at this time. He carefully shaped and molded his image in a society that very much valued form over substance. Because of this, he was able to open many doors and lure a number of young girls through them. And so if you've seen this film, please let me know, and until next time.